So to start, I wanted to just say a couple of things. One is, what is this program that we're doing? And it's about the Rule of Benedict. We cleverly named it Rhythm and Balance the Imagination of St. Benedict. And it came up actually because for the College of Congregational Development, this was one of the readings that we were asked to do. And so all of a sudden, St. Benedict came up. And this is one of those things, it's like when I bought my Prius. I thought I bought the only sea glass green Prius known to man, that this was going to be a special car. And, you know, and like all the time we buy a car like that, we drive off the lot and, oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. There's another one. So for fun, I brought, so I just went around the house. Now, I've already given Rob a few books. So these are the other books. But I have something called St. Benedict's Toolbox. I have something that was sent free from Forward Movement called the Restoration Project, subtitle A Benedictine Faith to Wisdom, Strength, and Love. So he's using the restoration of the Last Supper mural in order to say, how would you use the Benedictine rule in your life? I have, and Tim reminded me of this, a little book called Always We Begin Again, The Benedictine Way of Living, Daily Meditations, great little book. And then we have, this is the book that we were reading for the college, which is quoted by many. It's called Seeking God, The Way of St. Benedict by Esther de Waals. And you see this book referenced in lots and lots. It's sort of like buying my, driving my sea glass green car off the lot. This book is everywhere. And then I also have a copy of the rule itself. This one translated by Timothy, I can't read it anyway, Timothy something or other. And here's what it looks like of the rule. So the rule is not huge, you can see from this, and there's lots of white space in this book. So, so it's something you can pick up and read if you choose to. So today, what I plan to do is talk about history. How is it that this Benedictine rule is everywhere? It's something that was created in 500, the end of that century. And now I go to Holy Cross Monastery, an Episcopal monastery down on the Hudson. They are Benedictine. I look at Society of St. John the Evangelist in Cambridge, another Episcopal monastery. They're Benedictine. Sister Joan Chittister, who we all probably know, is in a Benedictine convent, I guess, in Erie, Pennsylvania. So they're everywhere. And how did that happen exactly? That's kind of what I'm talking about today. And then next week, Rob is going to talk about the rule itself, although I'll kind of point at it here and there, but he's going to talk about the rule itself and then how to incorporate that into your life. And so that's really the plan. So today is really history, and I could click my button here, I hope. I love technology. There we go. So my plan for today is why talk about the rule? I've just done that a little bit. A brief history of monasticism, because without monasticism in the Western church's eyes, we would not have any of these rules. The history of the rules, and a little of the life of Benedict. Frankly, we don't know that much about Benedict. And then the influence of the French monarchy, which is sort of the interesting point at the end of the story. So Joan Chittister has a book, and this is a book that I loaned to Rob, called Wisdom Distilled from the Daily, Living the Rule of St. Benedict Today. And she says, the rule of Benedict has been a guide to the spiritual life for common people since the 6th century. anything that has lasted that long and had that kind of impact in a throwaway society is certainly worthy of consideration. This book looks at these questions. How do we account for a way of life that has lasted for over 1,500 years? And what, if anything, does it have to say to the spiritual life in our world today? And if you're going to buy just one book, that book would be this by Joan Chittister. She has a very nice presentation that's very readable and available, and kind of how to, lots of examples of how it impacts her life, which I think for us, examples are good. Sometimes we don't always know. So leading up to Benedict, better known as the history of monasticism in the Western Church, and I will keep saying that because the history of monasticism in the Eastern Church is very different. So we start with Antony, and I will talk about each one of these. And then we should mention the Desert Fathers and Mothers from the 3rd to 5th centuries. And I blame Jay on Wednesday for preempting, I use the word, my conversation, because he was talking about one of the Desert Mothers. Then we have Basel of Caesarea, and then we have Augustine of Hippo, who is our favorite Augustine. Then we have John Cassian, and then something called the Rule of the Master, which no one knows who wrote that. And then we have Benedict. So Benedict is the end of this very lengthy history. And so now we'll kind of go through these and just talk a bit about it. So one important thing, so why in the 4th century did people wander off into the desert? You know, what was going on at the time that it seemed like a really good idea to go to the desert? And one author said that Christians were looking for a way to demonstrate their faith now that being a martyr was not possible. And so they went to the desert to show their sacrifice and dedication to Jesus. So it's a time of chaos. You know, we're coming to the end of the Roman period of persecution, and all of a sudden people aren't being rounded up every day to be killed by the lions, etc. So how then do I get to heaven, kind of? That's today's language, but how do I make that connection with God? And the way they decided to do it is to head out to the desert. So in the desert, we have a couple of people of note. Antony, who is named the father of Christian monasticism in the West. And we know about him because Athanasius, who was the Bishop of Alexandria, wrote a biography of Antony. So I don't know if you remember, we've done a program on Athanasius, and he kept ticking off the powers that be. So he'd get thrown out of the bishopric and he would go off to be with Antony. Thanks. So he would go off to the desert to be with Antony, and then he'd be accepted back. I think he was arguing with the Arians, if I remember correctly. And how did he end up deciding that he wanted to go out to the desert? It says in, again, one book, on his way to church, Antony was pondering how in the Acts of the Apostles, in that beginning part, a lot of the apostles were giving up everything. They were selling everything they owned and giving it to the apostles for outreach, I'll call it. And so he decided that that's what he needed to do. So he went, so he sold everything and went off to the desert to live this life that he thought he had been asked to do, and lived there for a long time. Now, sometimes when we think about him and others, we think about, oh, they were there alone. But what happened over time is people wanted to go out and be with them. And so there were thousands of people You know, 2, 3, 4,000 are the numbers that I saw in the literature of people who were wandering out to get wisdom from these men primarily, but also women who were living out in the desert. So they weren't exactly alone, even though they were living in the cave, but somebody must have brought them bread and food, and otherwise they would have died or an early death and we wouldn't know anything about them. So the other desert guy to know is Pachomius. And he is noted as the founder of monasticism, monastic living in community. And the other word for that, which you hear in the Rule of St. Benedict, is Synabetic Life. So Synabetic life means centered on community. But Pachomius was a Roman soldier. And often, as Rome did, when a war was over, they sort of dumped all the soldiers in that area. So if you think of the story of like Corinthians in Corinth, it was mainly a Roman town where a lot of Roman soldiers got left after the war. And why was that? Because Rome, if they came back to Rome, the emperor would have to feed them. So there was not enough food around Rome to feed everybody that was in town. So he left his soldiers out wherever they ended, and that solved his problem. So the next person in our history is Basel of Caesarea, and is called the champion of scripture and Synabetic community. So what did Benedict use from this particular rule? The primacy of scripture. So when you read Benedict's rule, he quotes scripture in almost every chapter. His divisions are called chapters, and many of them are only a paragraph long, but that's what they're traditionally called. So Basel, realized the power of the monastic movement to the church at a time when that very church was in need of moral reinforcement. And then standards. So the Bible is a guide to Christian life. The importance of keeping Jesus's commandment to love one another. The call to do God's will is a way to a deep connection with God. An emphasis on practical charity rather than extremes in fasting and other disciplines. The need for self-control and the importance of community to represent the body of Christ. So these are the standards that he incorporated into his rule. And so Basel is like 330 to 379. So we're coming to more recent times as we go. Then next we look at the rule of Augustine. And this is our favorite St. Augustine. Remember that he grew up in North Africa and then he went off to Italy. In Milan, he runs into Ambrose, now known as St. Ambrose, who was the bishop at the time and was converted to Christianity at that point. And at some point along that road of his, he was sent back to North Africa, eventually became the bishop of Hippo. But he established monasteries as soon as he went back to North Africa. And his role emphasized love and community with a common life and common ownership of property. So in the first place, and this is a quote, live together in harmony and be of one mind and heart in God. For this is the purpose of your coming together. Do not call anything your own, but hold all that you have in common. And so this idea of living in harmony. So one of the things these guys are trying to get a hold of is the idea that I want the spiritual development of each individual person, as the desert mothers and fathers were in that. But I also want them to live in loving community. So you'll see as these monasteries progress that Pachomius in the beginning had the monks live in separate cells, but around a community. So they had a central chapel and a central refectory where they ate, but every monk was in his own cell. So kind of taking from that desert mother and father tradition. As you move along and go forward, then all of a sudden dormitories start to be the thing where the people, men and women, are sleeping in the same room, kind of getting rid of that I have a cell, I'm isolated idea. But you still want to connect them with the spiritual development. And that's the role. So the monastic practices he's selling are humility, psalmody, private prayer, lectio divina, fasting, silence, simplicity of food and clothing, obedience, manual labor, renunciation of property, and strict chastity. So these same themes are kind of running through each of these as we move forward in time, with some additions as we go. Like here, the idea of fasting, we haven't heard the word silence before. I guess if you're living all alone, you probably have silence by living all alone. When you come in community, those are things you have to name and make sure that that's a value that people hold. Then John Cassian comes along, and he's early 5th century, and he documented the monastic tradition of Egypt. He was in North Africa, and I didn't see any reason why he decided that would be a good research project, but he did. And so he documented this, which meant that this documentation was then available to other people in the church, so that, you know, how did everybody learn about what the Desert Fathers and Mothers were doing? It was because of projects like John Cassian. And I put him in for sure because chapter 73 of Benedict's rule quotes him. And so this was a document that Benedict was looking at. And then we come to the rule of the master. The documenting, the rule of the master. There we go. This rule, written earlier than Benedict's, and was 3 times longer than the rule of Benedict. So one of the things that Benedict did was edit this rule. He wanted to make it much smaller. And Benedict offers a more moderate approach to monastic life and removes much of the minutiae found in the master's rule. Benedict adds thoughts on the qualities monastic leaders should possess and how the members of the monastery are to treat one another. So again, this humility idea, the love, sharing the love of each other within that monastic community. Those are the things that Benedict switched. So a couple things the rule of the master said was that you had no excuse for not being in chapel. You could be on your deathbed and you still better show up because that's what you need to be doing. So anyway, so thank God he eliminated that. So that's sort of leading up to Benedict. So now we'll look at Benedict and his rule. So the life of Benedict, we only know about his life. So I'll just start at the first one. Born 480 CE in a time of chaos. Now I love it when, you look it up on Wikipedia and it says things like April 25th, 480 CE. We have no idea if it was 480, 479, 481, I don't know. But Rome had fallen in 410. So he's really living in a time of total chaos. And the last Roman emperor was deposed in 476. So 4 years, round numbers, before his birth. There was no high culture and injustice prevailed. So the people from the European landmass continually coming down, different groups of them, and kind of taking over Rome, and then a new one comes and they're arguing with each other. And so that is the milieu that Benedict is growing up in. So we only know about Benedict because of the second book of the Dialogues, which was written by Gregory the Great, or Gregory the First, depending on how you feel about him, I guess. But in theory, he based his work on the testimony of 4 monks who knew Benedict. But it's not a biography, it's a hagiography, which is a study of sort of the enlightened life of some exemplars, people that we could look at and try to emulate. So that is really the focus of Gregory's writing. And so, but that is all that we know about Benedict. So is it true? Is it not? Who were these 4 monks supposedly? Did they like Benedict or not? They must have, because it came out as a pretty positive entry in his hagiography. And this is the same Gregory that brought us Gregorian chant. And in another series, we talked about the Gregorian sacramentary that was used by Thomas Cranmer to write our Book of Common Prayer. So this Gregory is really important. But Benedict was born in a wealthy family and sent to Rome to study. But there he seems to have been disappointed by the life in Rome. I mean, it's chaos, so why would he not be disappointed? And so he decides he's going to leave, and he goes to a place called Subiaco, which is like 40 miles, they say 40, 50 miles east of Rome, to live as a hermit. Now, living as a hermit, he took with him his nursemaid from when he was a kid in order to be the housekeeper, I guess. Those are not words I think of when I think of hermit. You know, so when you read that so-and-so was a hermit, you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt and say, well, who else was around him? So he could be a hermit living in his cave, but he had someone who could go out and get food and do all the things that you need to do in order to keep yourself alive. I thought that was an interesting part of his story. But so there was a monastery in the neighborhood, and this monk named Romanus found Benedict, and after conversation, etc., Benedict was given monk's robes and supposedly lived there as a hermit for 3 years. So Benedict, an important thing is he's not ordained, he's a lay person like us. He just decided that he wanted to live his life in a better way. And so he sets off on this journey. Now, over time, that monastery that was nearby decided they needed a new abbot, or the abbot died. It's not clear what happened there, but they asked Benedict to be their abbot. So he starts trying to incorporate some of these rules that he's thinking about in that monastery, but people were not happy, and they were trying to kill him. And so in his story, there are several miracles. For example, supposedly one of the monks in the monastery poisoned the bread that Benedict would eat, and a raven flew down onto the bread so that Benedict couldn't get the bread, and that was chalked up as one of the miracles that he created. So he became this person that people would travel miles to see because he could cure them, save them, whatever word you might want. Now, the other thing that's said, depending on who you read, is he founded 12 monasteries with 12 monks each. Now, did that actually happen in Subiaco, or did that happen where he eventually ended up in Monte Cassino? It is not clear. Different books said different words. So, but I wonder about the word 12. It seems way too orderly to me to have 12 monasteries with 12 monks each. Why? I don't know. Well, because 12 apostles, you know, I mean, it's a magic number. And so let's use that. And so in 530, he went off to Monte Cassino, which is down near Naples, and founded a monastery there. And so he founded the monastery, so it would make sense that he became the abbot and wrote the rule for his community, and lived happily ever after. That's really the details that are known. There are a couple of other things, but not anything major. The one thing that several people said is in 547, he became ill and he asked to be carried into the chapel to take Holy Communion. And then a very lyrical story about him standing up and offering himself to God, and then he fell over dead. So kind of a nice little ending to this life that we want to honor. And then this monastery at Monte Cassino, 40 years after his death, the monastery was destroyed by the Lombards, rebuilt, destroyed twice more. And the story we probably know is in World War II, it was bombed. And so I leave you with a question though, because Benedict died there, but are Benedict's bones actually in Monte Cassino? So that's a question we will investigate. And now I quote from McCullough, Dearman McCullough, his little tiny tome, Christianity, the First Three Centuries. But he has a lot to say about Benedict. And here he says, draws heavily on the rule of the master. And the later ruler, Benedict rules, prunes the text and adds new material. And he changes, this looks like an odd thing, breadth, simplicity, common sense, practical wisdom of a single gifted individual with a terse style and a gentler, less autocratic attitude than the master to the community, which an abbot must lead. And because there are theories, there were, I don't know if they exist now, but at one time there were theories from about that the rule of Benedict was not done by one person. It was done by many people and kind of pulled together at the end. But McCullough goes on for several paragraphs arguing that it must have been one individual that because of this terse style and this gentler, less autocratic attitude. So if people took the rule of the master and tried to edit it and it was a committee, it would not be as beautiful as it currently is. So the rule was there to describe how to construct a single community living in obedience to its abbot and under the same rule as communities around it, yet fully independent of any other. So I think that is really the attraction of the rule of Benedict. This idea that I can be under the rule, you know, I've read all the detail in my magic book, but depending on what's going on in my community, I can tweak it to work for my community. So I think of things like Abbey of the Genesee that with monks' bread. So the issues for the monks living there and making bread, I don't know if they still make the bread, but they did it one time, is different than, say, Holy Cross, which has always been a retreat center, you know, hospitality. So how do I tweak the rule in order to accommodate what's going on in my community? But yet there is consistency because they're all using the same 73 chapters of the Rule of Benedict. And you'll see why that comes into play as we move to France in a minute. Creates a balance between the spiritual growth of each monk and the general peace and well-being of the community. And so the idea, I think one of the ideas that it's grown, how do I take the Rule of Benedict and apply it to my own life? It's because there's lots of stuff in there about how do I develop the spiritual life of an individual. And so we can go through and tease those pieces out and then try to apply them to our own lives. And then I threw in one last thing here: solo monks versus community, Eastern versus Western. So in the Eastern tradition, just so you know a little bit about that, the tradition is really solo monks. And in the Western tradition, almost immediately after Antony, when Pachomius comes along like 50 years later, this focus on community is the thing that the Western tradition fell in love with and implemented through centuries going forward. So that's where we'll leave kind of Benedict. Lots of people knew his rule. It was being used here, there, and everywhere. But I want us to jump forward later to Charlemagne. And you say, how did we get there? So Charlemagne, born in 747. So if we, 150 years or so after Benedict. And why do we jump to Charlemagne? Well, he was, the emperor of nearly all of Europe and beyond, Hungary, all of those areas as well. And so, kind of master of the universe in lots of ways. So what did he do? He did a couple of things. He was very Christian. The Pope liked him a lot. But he built enormous cathedrals. And I put one example, the Aachen Cathedral, and that's his burial site. Not a dinky thing. So we're talking 700, 800. These cathedrals, they are the beginning of the great cathedrals of Europe. And that's Charlemagne. So, and he encouraged massive programs of copying manuscripts, because up until this time, the only extant versions of some of the Greek philosophers, etc., had been collected in Islam by the Muslims. And the Muslim libraries were repositories of all the great philosophers. We did not have them in the West. And so then this monastic tradition, especially under Charlemagne, and they came up with this type of writing called Carolingian minuscule to write faster, be able to translate documents and copy documents into the language that people could understand. And I don't know if you've seen any examples. There's lots of different minuscules type of text. And just looking at my time. When the choir went to Ely that summer long ago, we stopped at St. Albans and participated in a ceremony to honor the beginning of the Magna Carta. Left my mind for a minute. And the Magna Carta is written in a minuscule. It's a piece of paper like this big, in this tiny, tiny, tiny little writing. It looks a little like Pittman shorthand to me. But how do I get more text on the page? Because the page was expensive. It could be parchment, or it could be, hides of cows, etc. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But how do I get more text on the page? And it was really interesting to see that. So that little detail amused me. The other thing he did is gave the role of monks, overwhelmingly the agents of reform and change in the Carolingian world. And they were members of monastic communities with a particular formation decided by the rule of St. Benedict, which he had pioneered in Italy in the 6th century. So now here we are a century or so later, and the rule of Benedict is now in many monasteries under Charlemagne. And why did Benedict's rule prevail? So this is one of those stories, a church story that we love. So at a monastery in Fleury, toward the end of the 7th century, the monks mounted an expedition to Monte Cassino and clandestinely excavated the body of Benedict himself and carried them back to their monastery in Fleury. And so that gave them something that people wanted to go on pilgrimage, to go to their monastery, hence making more money for them and giving them power. So the Pope at the time said, oh, they have the bones of Benedict, therefore he gave them special privileges. And so this whole idea of let me get relics from others really began here, of how do I get these bones? Now today, Monte Cassino says, no, 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 Benedict's bones are here. So the answer to my question of where are Benedict's relics, I don't think anybody actually knows, but that's me. So the other piece to know, though, is Emperor Louis the Pious, Charlemagne's son, sealed the process during the 810s by decreeing that all monasteries in his dominion should follow the rule. Now it was to set monastic standards throughout Latin Europe, because that kingdom of that they ruled over was so enormous. It was really everybody. And then you had, going back to Gregory the Great, he was the guy that sent the other Augustine to England to establish a better Roman church in England. And so then, because of all those relationships and because England had owned France for a while, there was that relationship, the Benedictine movement first. Of course, King Henry killed them all. It took a long time for monasteries to come back in the Anglican tradition. But anyway, so I thought that story of Charlemagne really sort of gave the idea of how this rule became ubiquitous and why it's with us today. So last, a quote from McCullough again. Overwhelmingly, the agents of reform and change in the Carolingian world were monks, and they were members of monastic community with a particular formation decided by the rule which St. Benedict had pioneered in Italy in the 6th century. And this idea that that monasteries were the seats of wealth and the seats of political power. We don't see that today, but if you wanted, and I guess we're also seats of spiritual formation, the idea of a parish church didn't come about until later, maybe another 100 years forward. And so at this time, if you had birth, death, whatever, needed something, you went to your local monastery, and there was probably a monastery in your area. And then especially in England, we know that Henry destroyed all the monasteries because they had way too much money. And it was really a wealth thing. I mean, yeah, there was the marriage thing as well, but he wanted the resources of those monasteries so that he could do what he wanted to do.
So I'm going to pick up with part 2 of our series, Rhythm and Balance, the Imagination of Saint Benedict, a look at Benedictine life, the rule of Saint Benedict, or how to live in accordance with those guidelines or guidance from Saint Benedict that is ancient and not just monastic, but something that can benefit us in our own lives. Nancy took us on a journey of looking at how Saint Benedict, the rule of Saint Benedict came about, a little bit about the history of Saint Benedict, some details of the rule. But today we're going to look at that Benedictine life, the rhythm and balance of that life. The rule of Saint Benedict has been a guide to the spiritual life for common people since the 6th century. Anything that has lasted that long and had that kind of impact in a throwaway society is certainly worthy of consideration, says Sister Joan Chittister in her book, Living the Rule of Saint Benedict Today. A great book, and I would encourage you, if this sort of Benedictine life interests you, to read that book. So let's just review a little bit of our background. And I want you to think back to 5th century Italy. And what do you remember of 5th century Italy? Well, maybe not you personally, but maybe from history class. And I think the thing to remember is that during the 5th century, it was the collapse of the Roman Empire. And so, you know, Rome had been this massive empire, but had established the societal norms, the governmental norms, the political norms, the economic norms. And all of a sudden, the empire collapses, and there is turmoil and upheaval and confusion in society. I don't know. Sometimes it seems like we live in an age of turmoil and confusion and upheaval and chaos. Now, again, while this collapse of the Roman Empire might have been good for the vassal states, in the end, in the moment, there was uncertainty. And so into it steps a lot of writers and thinkers who were trying to help create order out of chaos. And one was Augustine of Hippo, who wrote The City of God to describe how we are to live, but especially how we are to live in our relationship with God. During this time of upheaval, and actually just during this time in church, there were a group of people called gyrovagues. Gyrovagues, what a great term. And these were wandering monks. Gyro meaning circle, vagues meaning to wander. And these were monks who were always on the lookout for something better. So they would move from monastery to monastery to monastery. See, there's our little monk in the corner of your screen. And he would wander around from monastery to monastery to find the better abbot, the better food, the better living conditions, the better rule of life, the better chapel to pray in. And he would keep moving around. And Benedict saw this, and Benedict didn't like it. Because for Benedict, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. And that's an important point as we begin to look at this Benedictine life, the rule of Benedict, and how it applies to our own lives. Just a little reminder of Benedict. He was born in 480 in central Italy. He died in 547. Now, he wasn't canonized as saint of the church until 1220. So many centuries went by before the church named him as saint of the church, and because his teachings were so important. But he was honored for those centuries in between 547 and 1220. He was honored as a teacher, a great teacher of the church, a great leader in monasticism. He is the patron saint of Europe, along with Saints Cyril and Methodius. He is the patron saint of cavers or spelunkers. And that's because he, if you'll remember, lived in a cave for many, many years. And so people would go out to find him and seek him out and seek out his wisdom. But he lived like the desert fathers and mothers before him. He went out of the city and lived in a cave to sort of commune with God and find a pattern of life that suited him, and others joined him in that pursuit. And that's how monasteries developed up around him and his rules. So therefore, he's also the patron saint of monks, and he's the patron saint of gallstones. and nettle rashes. So those are important things for you if you come across that in your life. But the really wonderful thing about Benedict was that Benedict finds patterns. Benedict was able to find patterns in life and patterns in the rule, often in threes, very Trinitarian. So in a Benedictine monastery, you work, you pray, and you study. Actually, you pray first, you study, and you work. And that's how your day, and then there's rest, of course. So your day is divided, though. Your waking day is divided into prayer and study and work. He also would speak a lot about mind, body, and soul, or harmony, balance, and rhythm to your day. So he spoke. He liked his patterns, and he applied those patterns to his teachings and to his rule, and to his guidance for a Benedictine life. But there's one particular, there's one particular pattern that I'd like us to talk about and to focus on. And that is stability, obedience, and conversion of life. And you'll see there how the arrows move from stability to obedience, from obedience to conversion of life, and back to stability. And stability is the beginning point. And remember, with Benedict, there's that famous line, always begin again. Always begin again, with moving from stability to obedience to conversion of life. Always begin again in this pattern and keep moving in this pattern. So what is stability? So stability is not stasis. Stasis is standing still, right? Not moving, rigid, adjusting and conforming. And if we stand that way all the time, I mean, even think about when we move or when we stand, we always are making micro adjustments, right? To stand still, we always do even shuffle the weight on our feet or something. So stability is not about stasis and rigidity. It is about balance in motion and about a sense of groundedness. So think of our little surfer there on the screen on his surfboard. A surfer has to move with the water. The surfer gets up on a surfboard, and the surfer is now propelled by the water, by the waves, and is in motion until they're off the surfboard. But they're in motion, and they have to adjust their balance as they are surfing and adjust their weight. They can't stand perfectly still or off the board. They'll go. Actually, they'll probably never make it to being able to stand on the board. So they have to move with what's going on around them. Move with, be balanced and have a rhythm and a pattern as the world, with the polarities of life and the dimensions of life. But it's a sense of groundedness, though. They have to be grounded to that board. And that is accepting this particular community, this particular place, these people as the way to God, as Esther de Waals said in her wonderful little book, Seeking God, the Way of St. Benedict. Stability is about understanding, so sense of groundedness and balance, and understanding that God is not around the other corner, that God is not in the new relationship, or God is not in the new job, or God is not in the new house or the new child, or God is not in the next best thing, in the next iPhone. God is not elsewhere. God is in the here and now. God is where we are. That should bring us some sense of groundedness, some sensibility, some sense of stability, some sense of balance and groundedness in our life. To understand that God is in the here and now, that the goodness and the mercy and the love of God is working in the here and the now, even amidst the waves and the turmoil and whatever else, and the uncertainty. God is in the here and now. But sometimes rigidity sets in, sometimes staleness sets in. And what do? Well, that's when it's time to listen. Listen to God in ourselves. Listen to God in those around us. Listen to God in Scripture. Listen to God in others. Listen to God in nature. Listen to God in liturgy. It is time to listen for God. To listen. A lifelong process, this is what de Waal says, a lifelong process of learning, listening to the word of God, listening to the rule, to the brethren and to the abbot in order to act. So de Waal interprets Benedict's obedience to mean to listen to the rule, to the word of God, to each other, and to the abbot. What we're doing in listening is acknowledging we are not an entity unto ourselves. That it's possible, my opinion, my thought, my hope that God is around the corner in the next new iPhone may in fact be wrong. That God may be working in this current model of the iPhone. I don't need the new one yet, despite the fact that it runs slower because Apple is trying to get me to see the grass greener on the other side. But the idea that we listen to God in Scripture, that we listen to God in others, in creation, and in ourselves, but with an eye towards change, an eye towards conversion, an eye towards transformation. So we're listening for that, and part of listening actually involves silence and listening for the still small voice of God. What is that God who is remember, God is in the here and now. So if we're finding it to be stale and rigid, what is God saying? What is God saying to us? How do we hear God? What is God calling us to? And we listen with this idea of an eye towards change. And that change is conversion of life. It is what de Waal says, a commitment to total inner transformation as we turn to Christ. Transformation doesn't always have to be these big, huge epiphany moments. I mean, this is a model that we can kind of use in day-to-day living, and it doesn't have to be about massive changes in our life. Sometimes it may, in fact, be a massive change or transformation in our life. Other times it may be small things, like the ability to maybe say, we recognize that this neighbor we don't get along with. We hear God in Scripture saying, love your neighbor as yourself and respect the dignity of every human being. We encounter that and we say, maybe I'm going to give that a try. And that's my conversion, to see my neighbor as a beloved child of God. And maybe that's just to be able to be kind to my neighbor. Maybe it is about life, about transformation in life. It is the expectation of and the openness to a new horizon, to the new work that God is doing in the midst of our lives that is forever drawing us to Christ. So it's a way of saying, conversion of life is a way also of saying, God loves you just the way you are, but God has no intention of leaving you that way. That God is going to continue to be transforming your life. Susie, maybe this sounds a little familiar this morning to you. But what happens when we have been open to this new life in Christ, when we have been open to this idea of transformation and journeying closer with Christ in our lives? Where do we go from there? Back to the start, instability. Because God, remember, is not elsewhere. God is in the here and now. So now we've encountered God in a new way, and we adapt those new practices, those new routines, those new understandings in our lives in order to find that God is in the here and the now. We learn a new way to surf. Maybe like that surfer, we learn a new way to keep our rhythm and balance in life. And that's really key in the midst of this as well. There's two keys to making this pattern of stability, obedience, and conversion of life to work. First is understanding rhythm and balance, the practice of living well in the midst of the polarities of life. And we find a way to live the many dimensions of our lives, our work, our prayer, our rest, our companionship, our study, in a way that will sustain us. All of this takes trust. Trust that God provides for you where you are. Trust that you will hear God when you listen. Trust that when you listen to it, what does that sentence say?
Leave out the two.
Thank you. There's too many twos in there. Trust when you listen, comma, it will lead you to new life. Thank you, Ingrid. Trust that when you see, it's very small print on my notes here. Now I'm scanning down going, I don't know what I wrote. Trust that when you come to that new life, that you will be able to live it out. It's a lot of trusting in this process. Trust that God is here. Trust that God is speaking. Trust that you will be able to find a way to new life, and trust that you will be able to live it out. Now, I said that these are this pattern. Benedict saw patterns, and this is one of them. So we have, as we mentioned, work, prayer, rest, but this is also stability, obedience, and conversion of life. Where do we see these patterns in our life? And so let's first look. We're people of liturgy, so let's think about the liturgical year. Right now, we're in the season after the Epiphany, sometimes called ordinary time. This is just where we're hearing about the life of Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, but there is no specific theme to the season. This is ordinary time. And so here we are in stability in the green season, right? But we're coming up on Lent. So we move into Lent. And Lent, of course, as you know, is a time of prayer, fasting, self-denial, study of scripture, inward looking, that leads us to the season of Easter, which is about new life in Christ, literally in the fact, the resurrection from the dead to new life. So this is about new life for us. And then we have a whole 50 days where we celebrate this idea of new life. We've worked on it for 40 days. We celebrate new life for 50 days, and we adapt that in our life when we go back to the long green season of ordinary time. And so we see that in our liturgical life, right? And then ordinary time leads us to Advent, to Christmas, to ordinary time. So there is still this pattern. Now, maybe that's not one that excites you. Can't imagine why the church calendar wouldn't excite you, but that's okay. We'll try our patron St. Paul. Remember, Paul was a zealot, and he was a persecutor of the church. But he was a very devout religious Jew. On the road to Damascus, he encounters Jesus in that vision, right? And it's the great, who's the painting by? I want to say Botticelli. Caravaggio, where he's thrown from his horse. But what we know is that he has this encounter on the road to Damascus where Jesus says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, go to Damascus, see Ananias. And so what does he do? He goes and encounters followers of Jesus, whom he was persecuting. And they teach him. So remember this. So this is the obedience. He's listened, right? And the conversion of life doesn't come until after he's had hands laid upon him, and he's had this new experience in life, and he becomes a follower of Christ. But his obedience was the road to Damascus, and then on that experience, listening to Christ, listening to others, learning of Jesus, learning from these people he did not know. And then the scales fall from his eyes. And that's the moment of true conversion. And then he moves in to being a zealot again, right? There's his stability.
Oh dear.
So I guess the question for us is, if we look at where do I encounter God now? Where is God in my life now? Where are the good things that are going on in my life? Where do I see the goodness and the love and the mercy of God now? At the same time, knowing that I can't stand on my surfboard and just say, the hymnal 1940 was the only hymnal ever to exist, and that's the only hymnal I can ever use. Well, okay, and that's great if that works for you, but maybe there's another way to experience God in your hymnal. But maybe it will never move that way, and you'll be in stasis, and there won't be rhythm and balance. So what do I hear God saying? How do I hear God speaking? Through those people I'm engaged in formation programs with, those people I'm in small groups with, those people who may disagree with me in the people who may disagree with me in welcome to all of you who are joining us. How do I encounter God with those, maybe those who disagree with me, maybe those who, how do I encounter God in nature? What is God saying to me? What is God calling me to? And so that moves to conversion, that moves us to the conversion of life. How do I adopt new practices? Maybe my prayer life has gotten stale and I adopt I go to Nancy, the program Nancy's done on prayer, and say, I'm going to give Lectio Divina a try for a little bit, and I'm going to listen. And maybe this is this new conversion of life, and it brings me back to stability. And Lectio Divina becomes part of my stability and my rhythm and my balance that keeps me on my surfboard for a while until it becomes rigid and stale. And then I say, I'm going to pick up, morning prayer, right one, and read it every day. Because I'm going to do that, and that converts me into something new. And then I have stability until it's not helping me on my surfboard anymore. It's really a wonderful pattern, I think. I think it's a really wonderful pattern, not just for our spiritual life, but for the life of the community, as I think, really, to think about. Go. Next slide.
Click on the screen.
There we go. Okay. So, and even in our community life, in our own lives, and not just in our deep spiritual life, but even in our daily practice of life, right? In our way of living and way of being, in our work, our prayer, our rest, our study, in our relationships, in the life of, as I said just before, in the life of this community, in this parish, there's stability, there's obedience, there's, that the stability, that rhythm and balance, finding God at work in the here and now. There's obedience, this idea of listening to scripture, to one another, listening for the voice of God in ourselves and creation, in our liturgy, that conversion of life. What's that new life? What's that new horizon that we can see ourselves being part of, and then adopting that into our practice of rhythm and balance, our life on the surfboard. And so I really do think there is a lot for us to consider when we think of Saint Benedict and his rule. This was briefer than I thought it was going to be, and so
it was great.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yeah,
Brief isn't terrible. I'm going to mention this, and then I'll drop the shared screen so we can talk. Here are some of the resources. Joan Chittister's. This is a great book. Wisdom Distilled from the Daily: Living the Rule of Saint Benedict. Saint Benedict Today. A really very good book. Nancy has Judith Valente's How to Live, What the Rule of St. Benedict Teaches Us About Happiness, Meaning, and Community, a good resource. And actually, I was glancing through this. This is a really neat book. Lots of great discussion questions in there. What else did I put on there? There's Esther de Waals, Seeking God, The Way of St. Benedict. Erin and Julie and myself and Ingrid and Nancy and Mara Hazard Wallingford are reading that book as part of the College of Congregational Development. We're actually finishing our book group tomorrow night for that. Lots of enthusiasm for that. There's always Getting the Rule of St. Benedict, and Nancy has a couple other ones here. The Restoration Project by Christopher Martin. It's a forward movement publication. And Always We Begin Again, the Benedictine Way of Living. And that actually, I forgot that to put that quote in there. And I actually, I came across it just yesterday. Always begin again is that motto from Benedict. You know, always begin again. Stability, obedience, conversion of life, back to stability, obedience, conversion of life. Always we begin again. And so that's Benedict. I'm going to stop.
Over and out. We'll see you guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.